Trigger warning. The following episode discusses child sexual abuse in a general way. Listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please find meetings and resources at www.talkhongkong.org. Find additional resources and links to get support in this episode's show notes. How can we build communities around the impact we want to make in the world? How do we get people engaged and excited to support our missions when everyone is so busy already? How do we get others to care? This season will bring you people that decide to look closer. They look where others have turned away. They are building communities to make a positive impact. I am Regina Larco, and this is #Impact, Season 6. Taura Edgar is a survivor of incest. While coming to terms with her own past, she saw that Hong Kong needed the same support she needed, and that she was ready to do the work. Starting with a support group for survivors, her charity Talk Hong Kong now also helps everyone in making evidence-informed responses that best protect as many children as possible from sexual abuse. Taura, in an interview I read, you said, "At the moment, what I spend a lot of time thinking about is how hard it is for us as a species, human beings, to even think about or talk about child sexual abuse because it's such a horrible thing. We as a species need to be better at being able to talk about it." Taura, thank you for being here today so that we get to talk about something that is so hard to talk about.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my absolute pleasure. I mean, the group is called Talk for a reason, and I am absolutely happy to do that. And you're right, it is extremely hard for human beings to think about that. I think sometimes we can say, well, in my culture, it's hard to talk about. Well, for boys, it's hard to talk about. From the evidence I can see, which is that about 12% of kids in Hong Kong are sexually abused, and it's 96% unreported. And those numbers are actually really similar around the world, at least in places where they are doing research like that. And you would see even higher numbers from the WHO. And what that tells me is that it's not just a single culture or a gender. We as humans have a hard time facing this issue.
Maybe I can bring in a little bit how I first met you. That was actually at a TEDx Tin Hau Women event in Hong Kong a few years back, where they had put up we had put up a booth for #Impact, and everyone could just come in and say what mattered to them, what matters to you, what matters to you. And I remember that very first interaction. I had so many interactions that day. I think there were at least almost 100 people in that booth that day with me. But I didn't remember every single one. And every single story that I heard. But yours never left me. It never left me because you had shared that that was just I think the starting time when you had started to also maybe even share your own story publicly. And I was always wondering that woman, that met me that day in that booth, I always wanted to ask her how she found the courage to talk about what happened to herself publicly and how she broke the silence. And that day we didn't have time to do that because we just had like a minute in that booth together. So I'm going to ask you that today. Like, how was that journey for you to find your voice and to talk?
Well, it only took 40 some years. So, and actually that's a very common thing I hear quite a lot. Delay in reporting or dealing with one's own abuse is pretty common for child sexual abuse. And that was a relief to know that later, but of course I had no idea. It was just something so painful and at the time shameful that you just lock it away. But by my mid-40s, I realized that I really needed to deal with it. And, working with a therapist was the top thing. And after a couple of years, I started to want to meet other survivors. I'd never met anyone outside my own family who was a survivor and known about it anyway. And my therapist said, "Oh, I think you should find a support group." And of course, I couldn't find one, but we'll talk about that later and what happened after. But I did find a survivor who was a friend of a friend. And she was the very first person that I ever said it out loud to other than my therapist. And that was such a powerful thing. And I noticed that every time I told someone, the power to hurt me got less and less. It's always powerful to tell someone, but it lost its strength to be destructive to me. And I also realized as the work went on that the message I wanted to deliver maybe resounds a bit more when it comes from a survivor, and I can talk in personal experience. And now having met hundreds of survivors and worked with them, I think it gives some gravitas to the research and the outreach that we do. So it just started to feel beneficial to me and what I wanted to work on. And what an awesome thing to realize that the most painful, embarrassing thing in my life actually was the most powerful thing. Not that I would wish anybody to go through that, but it's quite a healing thing to turn the tables like that on a trauma.
I understand that you don't like the word recovery in that context, right?
Well, I don't know if I don't like it, but I just don't think it suits. Recovery sounds like, oh, I have a flu and now I'm going to recover and I will be the way I was before, and there's an end point. But I don't think there is an end point. And that's, good news, bad news. It's just like life. Hopefully we all learn more about ourselves as we go along. And healing, I don't think, has an end point where you wake up and say, ta-da! I'm all normal now. So I don't know. Sometimes recovery seems a little odd to me. Is it a word you use often when you're thinking about that kind of recovery? Recovery. Freudian slip there.
It got me thinking when I read you say that in that interview I quoted before, that sometimes you don't like that word recovery because of this end point, right? What you just explained. And that resonates a lot. It resonates because there are for sure certain moments in all of our lives where we also go through, hopefully not for everyone, of course, but whatever trauma it might be, right? And it's a bit sometimes frustrating to see as a society, like we are very quick of just trying to fix it, right? I mean, fixing because we want to help, fixing the pain, making it better. And I know that you're so passionate about not even letting it get to that point in the first place. because you focus so much in your work on the prevention. And I love that about what you do. But the fact is that there are just so many people out there experiencing trauma. Yeah, you see, I just start rambling because, again, yeah, I find it so hard to talk about, right? It's hard to talk about it and to meet people like you that are actually looking at it from many different angles, as a survivor, but also as an advocate and as an activist, to bring in research and data, and peer support groups, and your big passion to prevent that this would happen in the first place.
Yeah. And I guess that's why you've got me on the series for community.
Yes.
Boy, it really does take a community. And I think because, like we just talked about, it's so hard for human beings to face the fact that we have an epidemic of abuse that's probably been around forever, but silence allows it to continue. So when I think about primary prevention, it really has to start with adults. I think right now the main thing that we're doing, and we absolutely should keep doing it, is teaching kids how to avoid situations where they could be abused. But my God, that's a huge burden on very small people. And I've seen some really interesting research coming out of the UK where they're looking at efficacy of that kind of training. And so far, I hate to say, but it's not reducing incidences of abuse. It may be for many reasons. One, that when parents teach their kids about potential abuse situations, they're so afraid to talk about it themselves that they're not very clear in what they mean. And since that education should be starting really young, right from the beginning of life, really, in an age-appropriate way. But, if you're talking to a 5-year-old saying, if you ever feel uncomfortable, tell me. I think just the concept of uncomfortable already is pretty confusing. And I think the other thing that is really missing in public knowledge, because we don't talk about it enough, is what kinds of abuse are more prevalent and how the abuse usually happens. It's usually not a stranger. It's usually not a one-off. It's not in a dark alley somewhere outside. It's usually family members or someone very close to your family who has spent a good deal of time becoming a trusted person in your life and a trusted person to that kid. And I think that's the kind of root of why it's so hard for us to think about. Because it means, look, if we've got 12% of kids being abused in Hong Kong, the WHO will say 20%, frankly. That means not only do we know kids who are being abused, it means if you know more than a few people, you probably know an abuser. And that's an intensely difficult thing to think about. But we really have to. And that's, I think, why I do focus on the research a lot, so that we can look at what evidence tells us and to point out what we don't know. I think a lot of us, and I definitely thought so in the beginning too, that, wow, there must be experts working on this round the clock and lots of them. But there just aren't. So every little thing that we adults can do to better educate ourselves, because we all know kids. They might be your own kids, but you've got neighbors, you've got relatives. We all come into contact with kids pretty much. And I think re-emphasizing the adult's responsibility, and by adults, I mean the community of adults. That's pretty important to me.
I'm silent because I just want to sit with that for a sec, that, yeah, there's that responsibility that we all share, right? How do you do this on a practical level now with Talk Hong Kong? How do you get this conversation started? And especially when it comes to that support that you offer to victims, I imagine it to be almost this daunting and crazy hard task to even bring people together when there is so much silence and shame around even speaking up and raising the hand, like, yeah, that's me, that happened to me. How Taura, how
Well,
do you do that?
let's go back to that very clever therapist I mentioned earlier. So my therapist, after a year or two, said, I think you should find a support group. I think you're ready for that. And after I left my appointment, I was thinking, well, why didn't she just tell me where this amazing support group is? But I think she knew that there weren't any in Hong Kong, and that I would find that out, and that maybe I would do something with that. And sure enough, I went back to my next appointment and said, well, there aren't any. And she was very kind, but she said, well, maybe you'll think about doing something about that. And I just thought, my God, me? um, But she did start a little thought process of, wow, well, if you wanted to do something like that, how do you do it? And I went and researched, because again, I thought there were experts and things going on. It must just be Hong Kong. If I go look in the US or UK or whatever, I'm going to find loads of groups that have some kind of recommendations on how to set up something like that. And there just weren't. I'm sure there are meetings going on, but it's not like an organized thing. Like, if you're going to start an AA group somewhere, they have great guidelines. They've done it a million times. They have a good structure. So I actually did end up going to an AA meeting on a recommendation of a friend, because he said, look, you're going to learn a lot about a peer-led group. And I did go, and I was blown away by the power of community in that situation. There's 20 people in the room. They're all very different from each other, but they understand one thing that they all have in common. And it allowed them to share really difficult things with more comfort than they would otherwise. And it helped them think through, what they were trying to cope with and stuff. And I just felt the power of that fellowship, even though, AA is a totally different thing and we don't exactly follow that structure, but I loved the feeling of it. And I understood why now it's such an important thing to have a community of people who understand a difficult situation you're going through. So I spent some more time kind of researching how to do it. I did find a few little examples here and there, really simple advice, like don't forget to put a sign on the door that says, please knock if the door's closed, really simple stuff. But it helped me kind of think through, okay, what should I bring, all that. And the very first meeting, nobody turned up, which was probably a really good thing, because it helped me kind of go through the process of being really nervous and, and slowly over the months, one person would come and then two people would come. And now 4 years later, we consistently have like 5 or 6, maybe 8 people in a group. But yes, it took some time to get comfortable. It took some time to see if I could handle, hearing really difficult things. And it turns out I can, which was a surprise to me, which I have a lot of support and a great therapist to help me manage that as well. And I think the scariest thing of all is if you've never come to a meeting, how do you get people who've been through something very difficult to come to a room full of strangers? And I think the only answer is to keep going, because the more that people see things on television or they see our advertisement on Instagram, we hear a lot that people say, I've been watching your website for a year and I finally got the strength to come. Mm. But seeing the topic of child sexual abuse talked about, written about, and that there is an option of a meeting to go to or some next step empowers people to make a change that they might not have made had they never seen anything publicly.
Is that what also motivated you to then keep showing up for that second meeting? Because to be honest, Taura, I don't know if I would have been able to do it. Like the feeling of like putting yourself out there, offering this, and then there's no one there. Like that moment of, wasn't there also like a part of you that felt even more alone in it, in that instant? How that moment of, okay, I'm going to make it to that second meeting and I'm still going to show up, knowing that maybe there won't be anyone showing up again, right?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the main motivation at that time was that it was something I needed so much. And when I went out and did the search, when you do an internet search and you type things you've never thought you would type, sexual abuse survivors, and you find nothing. And that's heartbreaking. And I really had a strong feeling of, I'm not sure if I'm going to be any good at this, but I don't want anyone else to do that search and find nothing. Now, to be fair, over time, I have found that there's a local hospital that does have a Chinese support group run by therapists. So there is a little bit of something out there. But for peer supported stuff, and for me, particularly in English, there just wasn't anything. And I just thought, if there's one thing I can do right now, I can make it so that people don't have that experience. We'll figure out later if I'm any good at this or not. And luckily, over time, the other great thing that happened was I met another woman who happened to be an old acquaintance who had been assaulted as an adult. And I'm telling you that because I have permission to do so. And that's Jill Marshall. And she co-chairs events with me now, our meetings, which is really nice to have that partnership. We're quite different personality types, so we balance each other out. She's a very soft, gentle Pilates instructor, and I'm a little bit more, let's get this done. So it's nice to have both sides of that and help people see that there are lots of different ways to get through it and that we can all help each other do that. But it also gives me a lot of confidence that there's somebody to bounce ideas off of, or do you think I handled that well? Or maybe we should do this next time. Or if I'm sick, she's there, Mm-hmm. So that was a real confidence booster just in terms of the support group side. But I suppose the message is, if you're feeling very strongly about why you want to do something, persistence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Taura, do you maybe have some recommendations for us then how we can support survivors when we happen to find out that our friend is actually going through that? What can we do to support survivors?
Yeah, I know it can be a challenge, when someone discloses to you and your first urge might be to ask them lots of details and try to help them fix the situation. But usually what most people need is for you to listen very gently and to believe them. The first thing is to believe them. A lot of people who are abused, especially child abuse, maybe have disclosed to someone like a parent early on in their life and were not believed. And we actually find that the incidence of false reports are almost nil. Not a common thing. So just listening gently, believing, and asking them what you could do to help. Rather than saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that, let's call. Just ask them what they would like to have. And they may not have the perfect answer, and you will not have the perfect answer, but just holding that space with them gently is really important. And it's more valuable than you know.
I am Regina Larco, and this is #Impact. Today, in conversation with Taura Edgar. Knowing that you focus also a lot on the research and the data, can you give us a bit an insight as well? Like when we look at these numbers, like the bigger cost of this to society, how do you? Is there a way to measure that even?
Oh, well, that's something we're working on. And hopefully within the next couple of years, we'll be able to do a much more in-depth study on that, because that's very much on my mind. Because whether you are personally involved in child sexual abuse or not, as a member of your society, it impacts you in ways as simple as your tax money. Because the trauma is not really the event itself or the events usually. The trauma is the lifelong impact on health, on mental health. I think if we could really see with some clarity what it costs the public health system, what it costs in lost wages, you would see an enormous cost there. And I know that sounds a little bit mercenary to be looking at it in terms of dollars, but it's an important indication of what's happening in society. And it's another point on which I say, even if you think you're not impacted by this, it does impact you. So at this time, the research we focus on is mostly to point out what we don't know. So the first thing we did was try to estimate prevalence here. So what % of kids? We could definitely use some better survey research here. That means large scale, cross community, more like a questionnaire format. We do not have that at all right now. We do not have something that most countries have, which is like a crimes survey, usually done by the government, where every 5 years they'll ask, have you been a victim of a house robbery? Were you ever a victim of child abuse? Things like that. We do have numbers from the social welfare department and the police, but obviously those are only cases that are reported. And as we mentioned before, Rain Lily's done some great work to try to estimate the delay in reporting, and it's usually about 13 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And I see that reflected in our support group. Most of the women who join us are either over 40 or they're quite young, usually in their early 20s. And then 30 seems to be a little bit of a gap, so I can see two trends there. But what we wanted to look at is, what do we know in terms of official data? So, for example, the hospital authority must have lots of this data, and they do tell me they have it, but they can't provide it unless I pay them to extract the data from patient data, which is understandable for data privacy reasons, but I find it amazing that we're not already doing that on a regular basis. So at the moment, there's no way to kind of look from a hospital visit to a criminal conviction. You can't follow that trail at the moment in Hong Kong. And I think that's really important to figure out. It's also really important to figure out who is vulnerable. So I have found an organization in the UK called the CSA Centre, and they are now funded by the Home Office. And they're amazing. I try in my own small way to model myself after them and do get advice from them from time to time. And what they have done over the years is to use that official data to try and understand, right, girls in Manchester, in this neighborhood, 10 to 12, are vulnerable to this. And then start to make really specific plans. You know, they still have long way to go in really getting super precise, but it's that kind of understanding that we need to have. I mean, at the moment, social welfare and the police department use different ages to define children. We don't have a standard definition of a child. We have very antiquated laws about sexual offenses, which there are some recommendations to change those, but they're still very gendered. There are lots of crimes you can commit against a boy that we would consider a crime that are not encoded in law. So all kinds of peculiar things that are good to point out, and that over time, if we can get better statistics, we can make better plans. But at the moment, we're making very general plans, not nearly enough budget around something we just don't know very much about.
Which actually brings me back to the very important prevention part of it all, right? So let's give our listeners some things they could do today, some things they could look out for. Could you help us do that so that we could all
absolutely
help prevent? Yeah.
Look, I'm going to speak for parents first because closest to the action. If you are a parent, I want you to ask everybody who has contact with your child, and I'm, of course, schools, but swimming pools, community centers, dentist's office. Ask them, what is your child safeguarding program? Now, you don't need to know exactly how to build a child safeguarding program, but you should know that is training for the adults who come into that contact with that child about how to keep that child safe, what to do if they suspect abuse, either happening at home to the child or maybe their colleague, and that there be a process in place, and so that adults who are alone with your children can better identify and prevent abuse. I mean, the next thing is just tell 5 people what you heard today, because I think starting those conversations in our own communities is what we need to do to make it a more open topic, so that you can start to let those facts sink into your brain. I think the fact is, we've all heard these statistics on the news many, 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 many times, but it's so hard to latch on to the information because it's so painful. And I can see that happen among my own friends who, maybe a year ago we had a conversation when I was working on our initial research and we talked about the numbers, and a year later, they don't remember, and they're parents, and that always blows me away. And that's why I'm sure that these super well-intentioned people are having the same issue all of us humans are having, that it's painful and it's hard to think about. But you got to get over it. Come on. Next things are, please do go to our website and have a look at the research. We'll have a new edition coming out later this year. Have a look at the resources we have available for survivors and for if you suspect someone is being abused, and how to support a survivor if you have one near to you. I just think if you can remember that silence is what is enabling abusers to keep going, we can change things. Whether or not you remember all the statistics perfectly or what exactly you should do, remember that very simple thing. Silence is the enabler here.
Yeah. That's why I'm so grateful that we had this talk, Taura. Yeah. And I want to encourage everyone who wants to take this responsibility to check out your sites, get in touch, connect with you. And I'm just so grateful that we got to do this talk, because, I mean, to be honest, why is this only happening now? You know, we met a few years ago, right? But also myself included, it's hard to make space for that on our minds and in our actions, to actually say, okay, I want to learn more, even if it's hard. And I want to talk more about it, even if it's making me feel uncomfortable, because this is not about me. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a generation's change. I'm not thinking, wow, if I work hard on this for a couple of years, we're going to significantly reduce incidents in that time frame. But and I'm sorry to say that, because I know everybody would love to hear it's preventable. We could stop it right now. It's preventable, and we will stop it by each generation doing better than the one before them.
Our ceiling is their floor. There's this beautiful song where that is, right? Our generations. Right?
That's a great saying.
I'll share that song with you later. It's really near and dear to my heart. Yeah. So, Taura, that brings me to a quick fire round. Are you happy to join me there? Yeah. Okay. Making an impact means
doing whatever I can in my little corner of the world to change something important to me.
Who inspires you in the way they build community?
I'm going to say the New Normal, which is another support group. They started off handling grief, and now they handle a number of topics. But they're amazing, full of energy, full of community, which is the key to it all. But I think providing lots of different ways for people to heal and to move through those difficult periods. The New Normal. I'm impressed.
I'm gonna have to look them up. They sound amazing. And what could everyone do right now to make the world a better place?
Talk honestly with people you know about things that are difficult. This one, for example.
That was such a beautiful call to action, and I'm encouraging everyone to support your mission, make donations, get in touch, join the community, volunteer, be part of this, reach out to Taura. Yeah. How can they do that? Where should they find you?
Find us on talkhongkong.org, on our website, or Instagram, Talk Hong Kong. And we are also forming a board. So if you're interested in a board role in any kind of capacity, let me know. I'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thank you so much for today, Taura. This was Taura Edgar, founder of Talk Hong Kong. If you need support, please find meetings and resources at www.talkhongkong.org. Find additional resources and links to get support in this episode's show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I talk to you soon.